I would like to look at, take you through the power column now. Individuality is really complex. Obviously, you know that. You know, we're dealing with three different kinds of circuitry. We have the integration channels, you've got the centering circuit, and of course you have the main individual circuit. And for the purposes of this kind of, this kind of course where really my real goal in this is to provide you with a much deeper understanding of how important it is that the collective process is something that dominates for us. And it's taken me a long time in my own process to be able to get to that point where I see so clearly that not only am I becoming more and more collective, but human design, because it is about to complete its first nodal cycle, that human design is about to formally enter into the collective domain. It is no longer new. And it's like having that big birthday where you can go out and buy a drink. Human design enters into the collective domain. And it's important to see that transcendence for the planet is something that only the collective is going to be able to provide. That the collective processes of pattern and experience, that this is at the very basis of being able to take the mutation, for example, of this knowledge and transform it into a collective principle that's not new. It's not new. I also wanted to be able to put in perspective the difficulty of what it is to be individual. And, it's very important to me that over the next several years that people will be trained at a very deep level in rave psychology, so that, and I'm not talking about professional analysts now because we're not talking about the same thing. I'm talking about people who will really go into the very, very deepest levels of what is the chemical dilemma of humanity. Individuality brings a chemical dilemma. And it really is about how the collective can bring individuals into the transcendence process. And they have to. They have to, because individuals carry the unique power of evolutionary direction. Isn't it interesting? I mean, to me, it's one of the most fascinating kind of catch-22s. You can't have anything new without individuality being the spark. But nothing new can be established as a lasting mutation unless the collective can teach individuals. Now, isn't that odd? I mean, think about that. In order for a mutation to take hold, it has to take hold in every single being in that sense. I mean, that's what mutation's about. It's not like some of us have neocortexes and others don't, Well, maybe that's true. I don't know. Anyway, I'll keep that to myself. It's the irony for me. It's the great joke for me. You have to see that so much of what we are is individual. And the individual is there saying, nothing's happening. And then all of a sudden something happens, but the individual doesn't notice. They're looking for their own, nothing's happened. And what is natural is that first the tribe gets it, and then the collective gets it. The tribe gets it physically, the collective gets it mentally. And yet the moment that the collective takes it, my old description of the collective is that it is Solomon's world. Nothing new under the sun. Solomon's world. The moment that something belongs to the collective, it belongs to all of humanity. It's part of the world that is. It's part of the constructed Maya. And then it becomes the collective responsibility in that sense to then put the message out. The pattern, the experience, to put it out. But the thing they have to reach are all the individuals. It's very odd. Because they're the last ones to get it. They are. The freak says, I can't hear what you're saying. What did you say? Manifester? Hey? I don't get it. I mean, it's one, for me, I like to think of myself as belonging to certain unions. I belong to the ego union. I belong to the manifester union. I belong to the freak union. And I get really concerned about the union members. I really do. It's like, oh boy. Because you see, as much as I love myself, as much as I appreciate the beauty of the individual spark, I also recognize the dense, dumb deafness. That was good. That's called automatopoeia. The deaf dumbness of individuals. I don't hear it. I don't hear it at all. You say, hey, there's a spark in the world. And they say, it's not mine. I want my own spark. And the collective says, look, let me share this spark with you. And they go, deaf. And you see, if we don't get them involved, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Every time that I can get a freak to acknowledge their design, I call up God directly. I got one! I got one! They don't hear you. It's not possible. I mean, it is. So, all these years I'm thinking, how the hell do you get this knowledge out? I mean, after all, that's my job. And then I think, got to turn on freaks. And then I think, oh, Jesus. That's hard work. I don't want to do that. Maybe the collective can handle it, right? Because only the collective can. I mean, they can. This is the thing. Look, and it's a really nasty piece of business. It has to do with the not self. Sometimes you got to take advantage of the not self. You got this vast not self that's all mental. Everything's mental. But if you look at the mind, you'll see that the collective dominates the mental process. Oh yeah, there's individuality in the mind. No tribe. So the collective has a way of influencing individual mind. This is the power of the collective. It can influence the individual mind. And the greatest place of influence in the individual mind is the 56th gate. And why? Because it's the opposition of the 60. And you should look at the cross of laws this way and understand what this thing really is. Because it's quite something. But you see, the individual process is not isolated, but where it meets, where the deepest acceptance of limitation meets the collective mind is in the 56. And what does the 56 do? The 56 tells us a story of the experience. When I started doing the updates, at the bottom of every update, since I've been doing it, since 1998, at the bottom of that update, I've always said, if you got stories, please contribute them. There's nothing better for me than listening to other people on Jovian radio. I mean, for me, I love it. This collective storytelling. It's collective storytelling. It's just about, the other day I went, and it was amazing. And I go, standing ovation. And there are all those people saying, They had that experience. You know? Oh, the collective's incredible from that level, because it can, see, the individual mind's a very funny thing. If you look at the 6124, this is the most, careful, Ra, empty-headed. I mean, it's nothing but dysfunctional noise. I mean, nothing. Not only that, dysfunctional noise in a loop. In a loop. Buzzy, buzzy, buzzy. You know? Just a loop. And there's no enlightenment in that loop, right? There's just a zzz. I mean, after all, maybe once in a lifetime there's this you know? And even in that it's like and you don't know where to go. I mean, it's, as a teacher, I used to love this. You know, the kids, you're talking and a kid goes, and you go, yes, and they go, yeah? This is the 6124. It's like, and then there's, I had it somewhere, you know? And the 43 comes in and it says, it sounds like this. You know? By the way, I don't know whether the 43 and the 24 have ever had a civil conversation. Ever. I mean, ever. I noticed that in myself. 43, 23, and I'm a 61. I don't have the 24, right? And these 24s is like, I beg your pardon? What did you say? I was like, really? So when you get up into the head, you can see this is the only place where the collective can say to the individual, there's nothing going on in your head. You know? Pay attention to the pattern. Pay attention to the experience. And if you say it enough, and sometimes you yell at them very loud, they get it. They do. Because you have to get them mentally. And this is all not self. I mean, when I finished my thing with the voice, the most depressing thing for me, and it was very depressing, was the idea that I may have to spend my entire life without meeting anyone who's correct. I mean, that was my first... This is the arrogance of being a spark. You know, this sense that something has happened, it's different, and everybody else is stuck. And it was like, oh my God. You know, my allies, my friends, you know, all of this. All of a sudden, everything around me was a stuck world. You know, if it weren't for the amount of logic that I have in my design, there never would have been a chance. And it was the first lesson for me. And because I wasn't abstract, it took me a very long time to understand the experiential component of transcendence. I was into the theoretical component of transcendence. And I saw that as I was trying to develop my teaching, that I saw that my individuality was going further and further and further into the background. You know, it was like Locke and I were just having coffee before, and he said, you know, you feel less mystical than you've ever felt. And it's true. I am much more collective in terms of my teaching. And I'm moving further and further and further away from this experience which remains tribal. Most of you, because I say so much, and you know that, I say so much in these courses, there's so much information, that most of our connection is physical in this experience, and the learning comes later. You know, we have a very tribal experience together, and for many of us, we're old friends. We've been doing this a long time. There's a comfort, there's a pleasure in this tribal support mechanism. But in fact, most of my work is collective and disembodied. It's virtual, and it will get more and more and more virtual, because it's obvious to me that the real transformation has to take place on this much broader collective plane. And on that broad collective plane, to be able to recognize that this is the way that we can transform humanity. by getting better and better at being able to present both the theory and the practice. It's not about the support mechanisms. My thing about therapy. The tribe is always going to be able to, because the tribe does learn. The tribe will always be able to look after its own in this process. The inner support mechanism that's there. It's what you know if you're in a community with other people in design, that you have a built-in support mechanism. But the collective process, to really touch humanity, for me, I just want as many people as possible to have a chance. That's all. I don't know about what comes after that. And I realize as I try to get to a point where I fulfill my role as a messenger, that I see that the only way I can do that is in the broadest collective plane. And I realize that only from that position am I going to be able to reach back to the individuals and to be able to bring their creative potential and their power for direction into everyone's lives. Because everybody carries these individual sparks within them. The mini Satoris that are there for every individual aspect in your being that suddenly feels complete by being the byproduct of correctness. And when you look at the power column here, you get into the plane of real magic. I mean, the 14-2 for me is like, it's the way you get to the Grail. I mean, this is the way that you get to the truth. This is the future. This is where we're all going. This is the planet flying along its fractal in the galactic environment. When I look at the 14-2, I always see it as a trident. It's my favorite image, Neptune's trident, Shiva, And when you look at it, you see the 214, and then you see those 3 channels from the G going up to the throat. Looks like a pitchfork. This trident. This is what it's all about. This is what we're doing. And this is the movement. And you can see the enormous power of the 14th gate. I mean, it is possession in great measure. For me, it's the only sacral gate that I will get down on my knees to. I'm a 2, I don't have the 14. Shut up. I saw that look. I saw that. Anybody I pay, I never get down on my knees. That's out of the question. Because without it, there's no fuel for the future. I mean, think about it in the sense that when you see the way that trident works, the 2, the 7, the 1, and the 13, this is Sphinx. These are the 4 Sphinx gates. These are the 4 gates of direction. These are the 4 markers of the quarters. This is what everything is about and where everything is going. And you can see that everything is going one way, but we perceive it 3 ways. Again, that by following this trident, you can begin to see that not only is individuality here to light the spark for the collective, but the collective is actually part of that process because they're designed to be open to the spark. That trident immediately goes to 1 individual direction and 2 collective directions. And the role of leadership, today we've got Neptune, speaking of Neptune, in the 13.5. It's the day of saviors. The 13.5 is the line of the Savior. And to be able to understand this movement that the very trident and the way that the Sphinx splits tells you about this intrinsic relationship between individuality and the collective. And that it's only because the collective veers off in the trident that it can actually provide the perspective of knowing what the direction actually is. And it's only when we grasp the direction that everybody can get on board for the ride. You know, if you go to the train station and there's no indication of where any of the trains are going, you don't get on the train. I mean, you don't know where it's going. You know, the reality is that when you're looking at this movement going up the center, you don't really get a sense of perspective unless you follow the collective track. Logic says, well, this direction should lead there. The abstract says this direction has been the result of our coming from back there. And because we can do that, we can see where we are. And seeing where we are is what it's all about. So this power column is something that is, you know, it is the keeper of keys. It is the beat. You know, this is what it's all about. This is our mutative movement. Now think about it. None of that is fueled correctly unless it's being fueled correctly out of the 14th gate. I mentioned that I like listening to Jovian radio. And I don't know when it was. It was a few weeks ago. It was a piece that Gennaro had done. And at the time, he was doing all the gates in the sacral. And he came to the 14th gate, and he talked about how, as a response mechanism, as a generated response mechanism, that what the 14th gate has is exactly the right energy for the right skill when it's operating correctly. Exactly the right energy. Now, in order for transcendence, for the whole to take place, we need exactly the right energy. It is just that right energy that's going to give us the power of direction. You know, the two's there, the driver's there, the collective monopoles are all hanging around going, we're going this way, we're going this way. But you know, every once in a while, those drivers, they have to be able to put their foot on the accelerator, and there's something there. You know, the 2 without the 14 is putting your foot on the accelerator and the motor's not on. You're not going anywhere. And you see, like the old hippie cliche about you are what you eat, your fuel dictates where you go. I mean, it's so obvious as humans. You know, if you're a vegetarian, you don't shop in the same places as carnivores. You end up going to different places, different restaurants, different stores that sell you food. You end up buying different things for the way in which you cook, and so forth and so on. You know, the quality and the nature of the fuel affects the direction. And all those 14s, they're all walking around this planet saying, nothing's happening. And because they're saying nothing's happening, that energy that needs to be specific is splattered all over the place. Some of the energy for this kind of direction and some of the energy for that, a little bit here, a little bit there. And there is no energy for the truly skilled transcendence. This direct movement. The proper fuel for the driver. You know, the 14 is something that is a very obvious, necessary component in my process. I'm very individual. I have a totally undefined sacral. I have the second gate. You know, for me, the 14th gate, I remember the 3.5 years of my life in which Pluto was in the 14th gate in the early years of my bringing design. The power that it gave me to survive what it meant to be on the road in all of those years. It nearly killed me. And I see that in my work, my connection to people who are 14s, and how essential that is. And how essential it is for them to become correct, because then they fuel the right aspects of direction. And as a life force, we become a way of moving towards a direction. You know, it's nice that I'm a good driver. I got this nice 2. It knows where everything is going, but it doesn't mean we get there. It's like me sitting under my fig tree when all this was over and thinking, geez, how am I going to do this? How do you do this? I mean, just how do you do it? I didn't have the power to do such a thing. I mean, people always want to be able to say, oh, you did a great job, and wow, you worked hard, and, it's just my transpersonal karma that these 14s, that these 34s, that the 2838s, that the 3955s, that the 22s, all those individual aspects, they drove my spark. They kept the fire going in the beginning. They helped it grow. They helped carry the mutation. And you see, for them, because of me, something was happening. Jürgen's 14, the Locke's 14, something was happening. And the mutation then had a direction and a power. And we've got all these 14s in the world. So many of them. They're not fueling the direction of transcendence. They're not. They're depressed. They're depressed. They remind me of these airplanes that there's been too much tailwind. And so they haven't used up enough fuel. And to land at any airport, you can only land with a certain amount of fuel in your plane. So what do? Before they land, as they're coming into Ibiza, they dump all that shit in the sea. And in many places, they're dumping it on the farm next door to the airport. But anyway, this is the 14th gate. This is the 14th gate, unaware, depressed, not operating correctly. And possession in great measure becomes this wagon in which you're driving along bumping and stuff is just flying off the wagon. And it's not there when you need it later. It's not there at all. It's gone. You don't get it back. I mean, some of the deepest physical problems in individuality. There's some of the deepest problems. I don't want to scare people. Cervical cancer. All kinds of very, very deep problems with one's reproductive and fertile system. The ability to produce enough red cells. All these kinds of things can be directly associated to the 14th gate. Directly. I mean, when the 14th gate is sick, it has a deep negative mutative impact on others. It's very powerful. It is the fuel of direction. And it doesn't matter where you see that 14, babies, adults, please understand what that actually represents, what kind of a power that is. This business of individuals being depressed because nothing seems to be happening, this is a disease in the 14th gate. I talk a lot about how depression is something that is a part of formats. Manic depression is a part of the 360. Melancholy is inherent in the individual. Now, the 14th gate has a real problem. I mean, the 14th gate makes other people depressed. I mean, these are depressive agents. You have a 14 that's at the low end of their stick. They empower depression in others. Now, that's not such a wonderful job. The third gate, that nothing is happening, its depression is in itself. It's depressed. The 14th gate depresses others, and not because they seem depressed. Remember the plane of the individual. They're zombies. They will depress you by their very zombieism. They will. Oh, I see it all the time. There is a taste for me of the zombie 14. I mean, it's a taste. Because I know that just by them being around in their aura, somebody near them is depressed. And it's very rare that you get that response from the other that says, boy, those people, they really depress me. But it's there. And it doesn't have to be conscious. It's sacral. It's generative. And you're dealing with one of the most powerful generated systems. You see, the problem with the concepts, that's why rave psychology is so important to me as something that has to be developed in depth, is to really understand that we have forces on this planet that are literally filling the world with depression. And they don't even know it. I mean, it's not like they're aware of it. Their very lives become depressing for other people. It's catchy. It's spooky. The second gate, being bless you, the second gate is, this mystically is where the monopole is. The monopole, if I could give it a characteristic, I would say that the monopole is deeply melancholic by nature. The driver is melancholic by nature. And the driver is melancholic by nature because the whole thing about monopoles is that they're looking for the design crystal. Remember that when you die, when you're born, when you're conceived, you begin your process with a monopole embedded in the design crystal. This truly is love. It's why we spend our lives looking for what we give many things the name of, love. This is the separation of the monopole and the design crystal. And when you die, what happens is that the monopole and the design crystal once again come together. And everything about your driver is that, you remember your driver is not you. The driver is the vehicle. The vehicle always wants to get to the end of the road. Always. The monopole wants to once again embrace the design crystal. For those of you that are going to take the final marathon with me through the last profiles of the quarter of mutation, that this is one of the deepest themes that we will deal with. Because it's all about the acceptance of death. It's all about the acceptance that everything comes to an end. All comes to an end. And it comes to an end because at the very basis of the way in which our mechanism operates, that you've got a magnetic monopole that actually is driving you towards your death. That's what it does. And happily in its own way. Only 25 more years to go, Driving along to the road of death. And of course, what makes it so uncomfortable is that if you've got that monopole sitting there and you've got a non-correct 14th gate, depressed as hell, everybody that you meet, you're giving that direction to. Everybody you meet, you're depressing. And you're depressing because they realize that you would rather not be here. And you don't have to say anything. You can be smiley and friendly. You can be, as happy can be. But the message you put across, this deep, deep mutative direction, is just nothing but depression. This life, it's terrible. And it's very powerful. For most human beings on this planet, if you really scratch the surface of their lives, they are unable to say why it's really worthwhile other than cliches. Bye, Marianne. Have a good trip. It is, why it's time for us to focus on our collective responsibility of being able to awaken correct action. Because that's what it leads to. Whenever I go into the mechanics, it's so obvious to me why we live in the kind of planet we do, why we have the kind of lives that are out there, why there is the kind of pain that there's out there, why there is the kind of disease, and I'm not even touching the disease that's in all of this, the sickness that comes out of all of this. I mean, for me, most of the sickness in the world, however you look at it, psychological or physical, is rooted in individuality. Mutation, not working properly. Mutation, gone wrong. It's like all these people that have autistic children, all these people that have prostate cancer, they're just innocent victims of mutation. That's all. It's not time yet. But the mutation is working its way through. And as it works its way through, people have to go through a process. We need to provide a collective mental direction. Mental direction. People were always saying to me, "Oh, Ra, this is all so intellectual, and it's all so wordy, and it's all so mechanical." Yes, that's true. And so it should be. It's the only way. You see, we have a protection in all of this. This is a choiceless life. This is the way it's going. Everybody is responsible within that sense in their own helplessness. That it's they alone that can find correctness or not. That correctness will happen for them or not. See, the beautiful thing about the collective is that when the tribe does something for you, you owe them. I mean, you owe them. It's a debt you have to pay. The beauty of the collective is that it is helpless in its sharing. That sharing carries no "you owe me." It's why we have to teach collectively. So there is no sense of debt. It's why for so many years I warned analysts about not telling their clients what to do, because they would become dependent on you for your support and guidance and would not have a chance to wake up on their own. For the very thing for years that I've talked about that I resent about the collective is the very thing that makes them so beautiful. They will share with you guidance, and they don't expect anything for that. Now, of course, on the mundane level, they get annoyed with you if you don't listen to them. But they're ready at any time to share the collective obvious. Well, this is the pattern. What's the matter with you that you don't get this? This has been the experience. What's the matter with you that you don't try this? I mean, it's a collective process. And that for most of you who are long time in design, and you have so many people's lives that you touch now, to begin to recognize that when you're dealing with those beings who are strongly collective, or those beings that are strongly individual, that you need a different kind of approach with them. You need to introduce them to the potential of transcendence, but in a way that hopefully doesn't necessarily carry that language, because that language in and of itself can be distorting. Once something isn't new, then you're allowed to say it's obvious. I mean, it's one of the things knowers learn. When I first had this, and I would look at people and I'd say, okay, look, there's all these neutrinos, and they have mass, and when they go through something, they affect it. And I would say to them, isn't it obvious? It should be obvious, right? It's there, it's mass, it goes through mass. I was always assuming that the obvious is obvious, It should be obvious. No, it's all new to me. And do neutrinos have mass? Well, I say so. Until 1996. And then it wasn't. Now, do you notice something? I got to tell you, this is one of the funniest things. Since the Japanese and Americans proved that neutrinos have mass, nobody ever asks me about neutrinos anymore. They don't ask me anymore. That pisses me off. I was the first person on the planet that stated publicly they had mass. They don't even ask me anymore. They don't ask me anymore because it's now the collective. On the day that it was discovered, I got all these very interesting emails and faxes. Hey, Rob, great. Now? Yeah, juxtaposition is based on neutrinos having mass. And everybody goes, yeah, right, okay, next. This is what human design is becoming. This is what it means to enter into the collective. To enter into the collective, given the number of software programs that we give away for free, in the last month there was about 1 million charts calculated. And I'm actually being low in my estimate. It's becoming part of the collective. Now when you say to somebody and they say to you, what do you do? And you say human design, they say, oh, I've heard of that, or there's somebody who heard of that, or whatever. And there's a whole change in attitude. It's like students that I don't get to see newcomers very often. Nice that I see newcomers once in a while. I don't see newcomers very often. And there's always this, aren't you lucky that you came in a different era? How different it is. I mean, I remember what it was like for my first students. I remember what it was like with him. It was hilarious. Can I really trust this guy? This is really, all new. The first people who said to me, what about this 88 degrees? And I knew that was going to be a problem. I mean, I knew from the beginning that was going to... And I'd say to them, I don't know, that's what I was told. And they'd all look at me kind of like, sure, right, Nobody asks me anymore. And I had this question thing at the end of the workshops. I was waiting for the classic questions that I have no answer for. Because to me, those are the most interesting questions. I love to be able to say I don't know. I mean, it's fun. There's some things you cannot know, right? I don't know why it's 88 degrees. I can give you a reason. I mean, I'm very good at the reason. It's very obvious to me that if it was 90 degrees, there'd be no life. I mean, everything would be frozen. I mean, you can see that the way profiles work and blah, 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 and you end up with a helix and da-da-da-da-da-da. But I don't know why. I can give you a reason. And yet the moment that it gets into the collective, everybody says, okay. When you do a reading for somebody now, in the old days, you sort of felt compelled to explain every aspect of the chart because nobody had ever heard of such a thing before. Now you have people whose friends have had readings. They don't want to know how it works. They want to know what you're going to tell them. That's all. That's all. And this is the point that design is at. That's why throughout this program in this April, those of you that were part of the workshops know I'm trying to bring us into a new age. I'm trying to prepare the foundation for this new cycle. The way we approach it intellectually, the way we approach it as professionals, the way we approach the potential of those who want to know and understand human design, the way we provide the potential of transcendence for others. For me, because I have that perspective, I can see very clearly that these 18 years has established a good foundation for the knowledge becoming part of the collective. It survived. It survived the first 7 years. It survived transference. It survived that there are now many, many people in human design who could carry the burden of the knowledge without me. In other words, it survived all of that. It's clear that it will live. And when you get to that point, you realize that's the point that it is no longer new or mutative. It isn't. It isn't. As a matter of fact, at the deepest mystical level, if you take somebody who's never heard about design now, and you show them a chart, it's less of a shock than when I showed the first charts to the first people. Because it's already in, whatever you call it, the neutrino ocean, the morphic field, whatever you want to call it, it's there. It's in existence. It's part of the world now. It's the shock I get when I Google. It's like, oh, am I ever in the world? It's so dense now. It's not new. It's not new. Now it isn't, there's something new you didn't hear about. This is the collective stepping in and saying, now it's our turn to take over. From the beginning, my goal has been to get to the point that we're at now. I could not think any further ahead than one nodal cycle. 18 and a half years is a long time. To look and see that at the end of that process, that not only was the knowledge vital, but it was able finally to leave behind its newness and enter into the domain of ordinariness. The joy that I have in my awakeness in my mundane life is what I want to be able to provide. A mundane education, a mundane knowledge, an ordinary knowledge, knowing who you are as an ordinary process, as ordinary education. It's something that's expected. That's the next stage of our process. And this belongs to the collective. And so in order for us to have and maintain this direction, it's the collective that has to teach all those individuals. When I had my event, every individual on the planet, every individual aspect on the planet got the buzz. They all did. Some much more intensely than others. Some who I've met who had incredible experiences at the same time. It went through as a spark and it touched every aspect of mutation on the planet. Otherwise, it never would have received its welcome. And the fact is that every individual carries within them a share of that spark. After all, it was just a neutrino stream. It was an ocean of information and I was just close to it. But it went through and touched everything. And it's our job to rekindle that spark in the individuals. To let them know that something has happened. And that until they adapt to what has happened, they're not going to find their creative place in the flow, in the collective flow. Because it's a collective business now.